Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm just gonna talk for a while about the planets, the procedural planets I've been working on for my Unity asset. So you may have seen my work with Space for Unity before, and you may have waited for a long time for for any updates. And I've been working with different things, and lately I've been mostly working on the planets, and it's a whole new concept of I used to have static 4096 by 4096 textures, and they were really they're static, and when you get close they all look the same. So I wanted to come up with a brand new approach to create really unique looking planets, and hopefully an endless amount of them as well. And I'm quite excited now to be able to show you a little bit more about how this is working. And the basic concept is that I use the algorithmic substance designer to create these different type of textures to generate all the height maps for the planets, and also the actual biomes or the textures that are, whether it's desert or forests, or maybe it's dust or iron oxide like Mars is made out of, or whatever surface it might be. These are all procedurally generated on runtime, and also the planets are generated just from a set of parameters that you can instantiate basically any planet that you'd want, based on a random seed or based on parameters that you set for the planet. And so this is an example of a terrestrial planet that's been created now, and I'll be able to go through the different type of parameters and looks and feels of planets, and I'll also go through the technical details about how they're generated and how how to achieve the look that I've gone for. And these, I should also mention that these are this is a DirectX 11 shader, so these are for modern PCs. They'll require a lot of tweaking for me to scale down if I were to get anything like this on lower end PCs. And also mobile is something I'll have to look into. So this asset is primarily for consoles and desktop PCs. First of all, let's start from the very basic. If you've used my assets in the past, I've used a standard sphere mesh, and I've changed that to a procedurally generated octahedron. I always forget what that's called. Octahedron, I think it's called. And that's a different way to generate a sphere, and it's to reduce the amount of distortion that you get. So that's one of the changes. And I've gone from my current assets is using plain spherical mapping with where I try to reduce the polar distortion, but this is a brand new approach as well, so we should hopefully have no polar distortion at all. And I do this by using two different layers of UV mapping for the sphere. So the waist or the belly of this planet, so from a side view, any side or around the equator, then I use spherical mapping. Whereas on the poles I use planar projection mapping from the top and the bottom of the planet, and then I do some crossfading and interpolation between these UV maps. And the reason why it still works, normally if you did that with just normal textures, then you would get crossfading of where the water is, for example. So what I've done is I generate using substance designer. I've created substances. So this is the height map that's generated for a planet. So it's a square texture that tiles in any direction, and I wrap that from within Unity. I wrap that around the sphere on both the projection mapping from the top and the bottom for the poles, and the spherical mapping. So, and since the shader crossfades that somewhere here in this region of the planet, so and this is an important thing, it crossfades the height map, not the diffuse map that you see now. It crossfades the height map, because after that what the shader does is it'll look at the height map and it'll say I'll set a threshold. So if I pull the slider here, for example, the water level, if I pull this, you'll see that I can seamlessly just change the amount of water on it, or liquid on a planet. It doesn't have to be water, I guess. It could be any liquid. And wherever, so the height map is a grayscale image that's wrapped around the planet, and the shader will generate the lookup texture. And so if for example, if I set this to 0.5, that's medium gray between black and white. The shader will render anything on the height map below mid-gray. It'll render that as the water, and anything else as the whatever texture is set for the land mass of a planet. Yeah, and I think yeah, I can also demonstrate by rotating on the planet, I guess, that there is no I was talking about that polar distortion. So if I rotate the planet, you'll see that the liquid wraps neatly around the planet, and there's no visible distortion anywhere on that. So I'm excited about that approach. It seems to really work well, and to good performance as well. Another thing I want to talk about here is some aspects of the planets can be changed in real time. I mentioned, and you did see the water level, and there are also other aspects that will that's shader generated. So that will you can animate that basically if you want to. Some of the parameters are based on the procedural maps that are generated, so they can also be changed, but it'll take a few seconds for some features to update. So that would be more appropriate to do if you want to do alterations to the continents or what type of biome or texture there should be. Those will generate when you instantiate the planet instead. So there'll be different, I'll clarify in documentation which ones are instant and which ones would require regeneration. But again, regenerating the planet is quite fast, so you'll see that later on. Yeah, so let's keep on looking at the different features here. If we zoom in a bit closer, let's make this one a bit smaller, and so I'll start going through some of the different parameters. The continent size, if you change that to a higher number, basically it'll tile the height map more, and it'll generate. If I put more water on, as you can see, there's a lot of small continents suddenly. Whereas if you pull the slider all the way to the left, it generates really large continents instead. So that's depending on what type of planet you want, or whatever the random seed decided that what continent size it should be. If we go back to about there, and I'll also take this opportunity to go through some of the technical challenges to get the planets to look good when you get a bit closer up. As you get close to the planet, let's disable, first of all, let's switch off the cloud coverage so you can see. I want to talk a little bit about the coastline. If I go in really close to the planet here, and then let's change the continent. Oh no, that can be on too, I guess. The textures that are generated in Substance, or as Substance procedural textures, those are 2048 by 2048, which is a fairly high resolution texture, but when you wrap that around a planet, it's got to reach all the way around from one side all the way around here, so you run out of pixels really fast. And what that results in, so at continent size 2, actually let's reduce this one to 1. You'll be able to see when I go close to this continent now, and let's also reduce this one because I want to talk about some of the challenges here. When you go really close to the planet and you have a large continent, you'll see that these are really jagged lines. Here's 1 pixel on the height map, here's another pixel, here's 1 pixel, and the graphic cards does a little job of interpolating between pixels, but it still looks really pixelated. And I struggled for quite some time to find a solution that I was happy with. I mean, the planet looks decent from a distance, but if you want to get a little bit closer to the planet, that's no good. The reason why there's a high resolution, I don't know if I mentioned that, but the resolution is higher on the surface here because that's using a different texture. The shader renders a land texture based on the height map, so that's why that one's higher. But again, the coastline, we needed to do something about that. What I did is, so if you take the height map, wrap it around the planet, and then I took the same height map and using the slider, the coastal detail, what I did was I just, so if I increase this to 50, for example, that takes the same height map and tiles it 50 times around the planet, but I only superimpose it ever so slightly on top of the original height map. So you won't really see any repetition coming. It won't repeat 50 times around the planet and look really odd that way. But what it will do is it increase the fidelity of the coastlines really much. So when I go close now, it's actually the surface texture that's starting to look a bit now, because the coastlines are really well or are really smooth now when I go really close, and you wouldn't really go this close to the planet anyway. So I was happy with that solution, so using the same height map I could introduce a high level of details on the coastlines. There's a few other aspects that you can control as well. This alters the procedural texture a little bit by warping it, just for some different, it's all about randomization and getting unique planets. And then also you can control coastal reach, whether you should have hardly any coastline, or whether it should be quite smooth coastlines, or if it should go out quite and creates archipelago. I never know that name. I should know. I live in Sweden. We have a lot of them, but basically where you have a lot of small islands in the ocean. So yeah, let's not go too much into depth there. That was maybe a bit unnecessarily technical, but again, bottom line is that fidelity on the coastline should be quite good. And let's go back to some settings and let's move further on. We've talked about the liquid level. There are some aspects to ice color. We don't have any ice yet. I'll show that later on. Specular power you can control, so that's how much you should have specularity on the surface reflection from the star. So I guess different liquids on different planets would have different type of specular reflection. The next thing is, let's introduce some clouds again. It always looks a bit better with clouds on, I think. The next thing is the atmosphere I want to talk about. So first of all, you can set the color of the atmosphere. Usually we're accustomed to blue since we live on Earth, but I guess you could use any type of atmosphere for a planet. So the color is one parameter that can be changed, and then also the external size. I think for Earth you'd only really have a small atmosphere like this. I think it's 2.5% of the radius or something like that. I'm probably wrong there, but it's a really tiny amount. But we're probably in games and stuff you usually see atmospheres like this. It looks a bit more interesting, I guess. Yeah, you can control the external size, and you can also control the external density of the atmosphere. And you can also control the internal density, which is rim lighting for the planet. So that's basically how much of the effect should be rendered across the planet as well. Let's reset this a little bit. Maybe something like that. And also, there is also a twilight zone. So between where it's daylight and night, you can control how prominent that effect should be. And I've gone for a non-scientific approach here because I want to save performance. And this is so basically all I'm doing is I'm doing a texture lookup or a color lookup. So the more it transitions, the more it fades into this color. So there's no atmospheric scattering on this one. I didn't really find it too necessary because I also want to mention this because I've had a lot of requests. Oh, can we land on planets seamlessly? And no, you cannot. And there's a good reason for that. It's through my research that I've conducted, I've found that I can either make planets look good from space and not have them transition seamlessly, or I can get planets that look decent from space where it does allow a transition onto a seamless surface. And I create space assets mainly, and I've opted for the approach that I get planets that I'm happy with from space. So I guess the best way to do it, if you want to have use these planets and transition to them, is to, when you get close enough, you basically just detect the collision, and then you do a scene load, or you swap out the assets and pretend you're on the surface, because getting that seamless transition, it will require a lot of time and resources, and that I simply don't have as a single developer on this project. So So these are space view planets. I just wanted to mention that and be very clear about that at this stage anyway. That might change in the future, but that's the way it is now. So let's move on. We've talked about liquid, we've talked about atmosphere and coast and so forth. So let's go into cloud coverage. There's again, this is a procedural texture. I keep saying that probably, but it generates a cloud map that is tiled around the planet, and you can control things like opacity. So how much should the clouds be visible, and you can control roughness. So that's basically just a bump map of the cloud. So that can be changed. And then you have another parameters which is similar to opacity, which is coverage, and that says how much should the cloud layer cover the surface. So at the lower end here, it'll only take some aspects of the cloud layers, whereas if you pull this all the way up, you'll basically get a fully cloud covered planet. I've also broken it in so that the substance will render 3 different layers of clouds, different types. If I pull this all the way down to the bottom, I'll be able to go through them. As you can see, this takes a little bit longer to update, and this is because these are changes that are done to the procedural texture, so that will require it to regenerate. Let's see if I do. Let's see, this should go all the way. There we go. So if I introduce the first layer here, you'll see that these are more like I guess a fog type, or really dimmed out layer of clouds. The next layer that's controllable individually or separately is more streaky layers of cloud, and then the final one is scattered type of clouds. And you can just randomize these to get the look that you're after, or let the instantiator decide what it should look like. So let's reduce this. I guess usually somewhere in between here looks quite realistic, I guess. Another thing you can change is the tiling of the clouds, and again here we run into the texture size issue, because if I reduce tiling to 1, it takes a single 2048 texture and wraps it all the way around the planet, and as you can see, the level of detail then is greatly reduced, so it doesn't look so good. Luckily enough, you can at least have size 2 in tiling and never have any repetitions, because you'll only see 1/2 of the planet at any given time, and also the poles are it crossfades around the poles as well, so that's not really an issue. And you can even go up to even at this level 4 tile wraps, you don't get too much repetition, and you can even go higher up to around 6 maybe and still get quite a unique look, and then you start getting the level of details that you'd probably want for it. If we press start here again, let's see. I should mention that you can control the speed as well. So if I increase the speed, you'll see that there is a rotation. Basically, it's ever so slight. Let's go a little bit closer actually. Let's stop here. You'll see that the clouds are blowing around the planet. So that's a shader-based feature as well. So that'll just animate them and keep them rotating. I guess if I go a little bit closer yet, you'll see that it moves a bit faster as well. There we go. And I think most of the time you'd probably want to keep this a bit low. It looks a bit odd. I think when clouds move too fast across the planet, you wouldn't really see it from space unless it's a really windy planet, I guess. I think that'll be that's a feature I'm going to put on the gas giants as well, I think. You can also control the height of the clouds, and that basically just offsets the shadow. If we increase the opacity here, you'll be able to see that a bit more. So yeah, here, just the height of the cloud layer, and also you'll be able to control how much the shadow should be visible, how solid the clouds should be. And if you disable clouds altogether, it'll disable that from the shader and save performance as well. So those were the clouds. Let's move on to lava. if I enable this, basically it'll crack the planet into lots of little fragments, and it'll render a lava texture wherever there is not water or liquid. If we reduce this a little bit, you can control a lot of parameters here as well, like how big, for example, the chunks or fragments should be. And this works basically like the other concepts as well. It'll just how many times you should tile the crack texture, and then similar to the way I did with the height maps, I just look up on the crack texture and see if it reaches above a certain threshold. I'll render lava there and the other way around. Same as the other concept, I guess. And there's a lot of parameters here, and these all control just different level of detail aspects. And reach is similar to the coastal reach, so how far the lava reaches out from the cracks. Complexity, if I slide these down, actually you'll be able to see how the base is. It looks crap like this, but the reason why is because this takes the crack texture and it's not tiled more than once, and it just does this lookup. So at this, you would never render it like this, and it would never default like this if you were to instantiate the planet. I'll make sure of that. So basically, as the frequency goes up, the number of cracks increase, and as complexity is increased, it starts to warp the texture, and you'll start to get more. I don't know if you can call it natural cracks, because these are fake. But anyway, it looks better anyway. And you can also increase the detail parameter and the reach parameters to get a look that would look more appealing, I guess. And then amount, you can either keep it into a really low amount. Let's see if we can let's do something maybe like this would let's have a look. Reach, yeah, let's just play around with the parameters a little bit here. Molten lava, frequency, detail. Oh yeah, if you slide this all the way up, you'll get more lava. You won't be able to fill the planet. I've disabled that because the lava texture would tend to look quite repetitive. So I'll probably do a separate full lava planets for that use instead of using this same shader for that. So you'd probably want to keep these quite small. Yeah, and if you play around even further with the settings, you can get a really subtle effect, I guess, with a lot fewer cracks. And also, when you go closer to the planet, let's have a look. These are under the clouds as well. Obviously, they'll light up on the dark side because you'd expect that from lava to be visible, especially in the night side. And it also overlay clouds on top, as you can see over here. There, see that the clouds overlay the lava. And if we actually do this as well, let's make them slightly more like that. You'll be able to see the textures are animated as well. Let's go a bit closer. So the shader will basically just do an offset animation of the lava itself within the planet. As you can see here, there's some movement within the lava itself. And you'll have the clouds moving over here. These are quite transparent clouds, so you don't really overlay them too much. But okay, so that's the lava bit. Let's keep that on a little bit. So we've got the clouds, the atmosphere, the lava enabled. Maybe the next thing I'll be able to go through is I'll speak a little bit about the surface. Yeah, I guess that's next in line. So you'll be able to control. Oh yeah, this is the overall. It actually affects the cloud as well. it's the bump map of the entire planet. So if I reduce the planet or the clouds, I might change that so these are independent, because they both control the shader bumpiness. Never mind. We can alter the amount of, I was speaking before about the detail of the ground itself, and you can actually tile the land textures independently as well. As you can see, if I tile this down to 1, you'll see a lot of pixelations. And luckily enough, since basically I crossfade between different types of land textures, whether it's desert or forest in this case. So you get away with quite a lot of tiling without it looking repetitive, because the shading is based on a biome map, so it'll jumble it around enough so you don't really see any repetition. So you wouldn't really need it. You'd want to have it keep it higher than 1 in the tiling. And probably get away with it up to about here, 24 for example, without seeing any repetition really. And then you start getting quite a lot of detail as you get close to the planet. So we were talking before about the quality of the coastlines, but now we're looking at the detail on the actual surface of the planet itself. And as I get close here, you'll see here's a few canyons down, let's see here. And now you're actually, the cloud detail is the limitation now when you get this close. The surface of the planet looks quite good. So these textures as well that are wrapped around the surface, I'll get into the 2 different biomes, because you can have 2 different biomes on a planet, and in this case the green parts are the rainforest, and this tanned is desert. And these took some playing around as well to do. I'll show you in Substance Designer here. So this is what the graph looks like to generate desert surface. And again, it's just a whole bunch of different scatter maps. So I've got grunge maps and different grunge maps, and I mix it with loads of different gradients to create desert looking textures. And in the end I get this texture that's got, so this will generate at 2048 by 2048, and it looks quite realistic, I think, what you'd expect a desert to look. I've compared it to Google Earth, for example, to see what it looks like, and I'm quite happy with the results. You'll have different features like dunes and so forth. What I also did for all these biome textures is that I've created an independent set of parameters and exposed them, and these parameters are the same for basically for any biome that I create. And if I go in, first of all, you can control the seed, I guess, to say if it should look, if it should just generate different randomness of it. You can also control things like warp, which is just a slight, let's see if that even does anything. Oh yeah, it's an ever so slight effect on this one. It's not a good example. You can control something called biome coverage, because every biome will generate 2 different types of textures. So here's a light desert texture, and on the other end of the spectrum there's a dark end of the texture. And when it generates this, it'll randomly say what the balance should be between these textures, just to create more variation of the different deserts. And again, if you alter the seed and this balance coverage, for example, you'll get a lot of different looks out of this one single graph texture. Another thing you can control is the hue, so you can alterate whether it should be different types of deserts, or whether it's whatever it is, desert or dust or whatever it could be. Here's a parameter I'll show later on, alienization. Basically it'll create alien planets, because maybe dust or sand wouldn't look the same on a different planet, so I'll show that in a second. Saturation is also controllable, so whether it should be really lacking color, or if it should have a lot of color, for example. So these parameters are all available and exposed into the instantiator of the planets, so you'll be able to generate a lot of different looks of these surfaces. You can also control the brightness of a surface, again, just to get even more variations of this texture. And then we get into craters. This graph will generate a lot of different. Let's have a look here, for example. By using different generators in the substance, I can generate what starts to, after a while, look like a crater. So I'll superimpose these different type of graphs and mix it, and towards the end I'll scatter these in different sizes and in different sizes and opacities, I guess, transparencies, onto a map that I can then I do two things with it. I generate, you can't really see that here, but I'll generate a bump map from it, and in the end I'll also generate a diffuse map, so I can control, let's have a look. If we increase the slider, I won't be able to show the bump map in here, but if I increase the slider for the diffuse strength for the craters, you'll see that you can control that they actually start appearing on the texture. And then you can also control how many, if I don't want any large craters, for example, then you can remove them. Or if you don't want any medium or small craters, let's say we didn't want any small craters, you can take them away. Or have anything in between. So if you set a parameter and instantiate a planet in the future, you say this is a young planet, it doesn't have maybe an atmosphere, it's not really active, then it'll keep, like the moon, I guess, or Mars, does that? Yeah, not Mars so much, but other planets anyway, and moons, they'll have, without an atmosphere, it'll keep craters for a very long time, so you'll be able to set parameters for the planets that you instantiate. Or you could use this to instantiate moons as well. You'll also have, the final thing I've got here is canyons, and those work in the same way. Whether you want canyons to be generated both from a diffuse color map and from bump map. Oh yeah, and you can erode craters as well. I'll speak a little bit more about the craters very shortly from within Unity, I think. Let's reduce the lava a bit. And we can start looking into swapping these biomes out now, I guess. If we were to change this desert one, we can change this one to, for example, dust. And dust will, by default, let's have a look, remove the craters because I need to introduce them again. So I can, if I pull up the slider now for craters, you'll be able to see that the bump map is this will, here's a good example of what's not generated during by the shader. So this will alter the texture, so you wouldn't really animate the slider in runtime. You'd instantiate a planet with a certain amount of set or a specific type of setting, and then you'd be happy with that. You wouldn't really change this one for performance reasons. So yeah, you'll have start to have crater impacts here. If we swap, you can control, if we wanted to, it's combining dust now with rainforest. We don't really want to do that for this example. So you can control the balance between the two biomes. So if we balance, so there's a lot more dust on the planet, and let's remove a lot of the liquid like that. And then we might want to change the surface roughness, reduce that a little bit. It was a bit too strong maybe. You'll start to get change it from a terrestrial planet now. You've taken away a lot of the green, introduced a lot of dust instead. And then maybe we want to change the tiling. Let's see, that wasn't the tiling I was thinking of, this is the one I was thinking of. So you'll have maybe like this. And so we're on dust there still. You can control a lot of different aspects, as I mentioned, on the texture. Here's, for example, the color or the brightness of the dust. So you can go for a really dark look, or I guess a really bright one. And then we can actually combine this now. So we'll have dust on the biome 2, and then we'll swap this one to desert maybe. Maybe that'll create an interesting look. And we need to change the balance here as well. So now it's mixing the dust biome with the desert biome. And we can also change the contrast here between the two biomes. Maybe like that. and there's chaos settings and a few other settings as well like that. And maybe on the desert biome we want to create, maybe we want craters there as well. So we'll introduce the crater bump map, and we could do the surface bump in general, should be higher possibly. Maybe we want this desert to be, we had the brightness for example, you could go really dark maybe for one look, and maybe you wanted to change the color variation of that desert to a brown look. You know, the options now are starting to become quite endless, I think, when you can start to tweak all these different biomes, combinations, tiling, and different type of contrasts and so forth. And maybe you wanted black liquid on this planet, or maybe blue, maybe something really odd like copper color. Let's keep it black for some reason. Let's say there's some form of a black liquid on this planet. Yeah, and then let's see, we can again play around with the roughness, I guess, of the surface to get a really prominent landscape. And let's go close again. And when you look at the craters here as well, there's also an erosion slider. So on this dust biome, let's see if we swap the balance here so we just get the dust again like that. And then if we pull the, so we'll increase on to max, and then we have the crater erosion here. You'll be able to create, alter how much the crater impacts should have eroded. So if I pull all of this, you'll have these are really old impacts now, so they're quite eroded. And there's also canyons that you can have, canyon bump maps, and I can this I've mentioned before, I guess, but you can control whether it should be large or small craters. Let's reduce that erosion again, and let's reduce maybe the surface roughness is too prominent, so maybe something like that would look better. And we can change the balance here again. Okay. Yeah, and then for a planet like this, it would be quite odd with the blue atmosphere, so let's try to change that. Maybe it would have some nearly orange glow type of atmosphere from all the sulfur. I'm not sure what would be in this atmosphere. And maybe it would be less prominent like that, and maybe really tiny. And then we can try to fly over this planet to see what it starts to look like. So you'll have the lava aspects here, you'll have the craters. So basically this is the same planet now, it's just tweaked a lot of the different parameters to have a totally different look of this one. So hopefully now you'll be able to see that there'll be hopefully a more or less endless combination to instantiate on runtime any planet that you could ever want. I hope. So I should mention again, these are solid planets, so I'll do molten probably separate, and definitely gas planets I'll do differently. Same type of technology, but I'll just I won't need to reduce the performance and complexity with all these other features that the solid planets will have. We can also, let's see, we wanted to, the last feature here below the biomes is cities and population. And if you slide the population slider up, you'll see that the dark side is starting to populate of the planet. You will not really see it. This is basically simulating just settlement on the planet. So if I switch off the lava maybe, or at least reduce that a lot, like this, you can set the color of the cities, whether they should be yellow or white. I think somewhere in between here looks decent. So yeah, this simulates, you can say whether it should be a little bit settled, have a little bit of a population or more, and you can also control the tiling of this. Whether it's a large planet, maybe you'd have something like this. Let's keep it somewhere in the middle. And then there's another slider I decided to introduce, and that's for, I called it advancement, and that's how advanced the population is. And if you introduce this one, you'll see that there'll be a few cities that look more like huge. Let's fly closer to this one. So you'll have little maybe remote cities scattered like that, and then this simulates, let's have a look, some really giant cities that are have maybe road networks going and so forth. So we can tile that one a bit more as well. And then obviously cities won't populate wherever there's liquid. So if you have liquid like that, we could also change the maybe the clouds on a planet like this would be totally different. Maybe they would be even black or dark gray, maybe, or maybe they'd have a bit of an orange feel to them even, since it's probably not such a healthy place. So now we'll be able to have a look at how the settlements are wrapping around the water here. So here you can see that, let's have a look, the cities are, here's liquid underneath, so that's why it's not populating there. Okay, let's have a look. Let's introduce some lava again, maybe. Lava, there we go. And maybe you'd reduce the atmosphere, maybe. Yeah, I think oh yeah, now I can actually, let's see, I'm planning to possibly introduce something called the terraform feature as well. I haven't decided fully on that, and that's whether you'd go from a planet like this, and the idea is if you slide the terraform slider, it would gradually morph it into what would look like Earth, basically. So that's one idea I've got. I'm not quite sure whether I'll do it or not yet, but it's an idea. And what else should I mention? I think, yeah, let's just do some swapping back as well before I finish this video off. I think if we just reverse this a bit speedy, so we'll change the atmosphere. So basically, if this were to be a terraform thing, or whether you do it manually, let's start to morph this back into what would look like Earth. So you'd have desert. Let's change this one to rainforests, and let's change dust to, oh yeah, I should also mention you have iron oxide, which is what Mars is created of. So that's another biome that you could have. Maybe it would have rainforest and tundra. As you can see, that takes a bit longer to change because these are regenerating those textures that are wrapping around. And we'd want to introduce brightness to the texture here again. Maybe I should have a reset feature actually to default here. And let's change the cloud coverage back into white clouds. Let's remove the lava again. And let's brighten up the rainforests a bit. Too bright maybe. Like that. You can change stuff like contrast and balance, as I mentioned before here as well. And then maybe you wouldn't see too many craters there, for example, either. But and then we'll introduce a bit of a bluer water like that. Let's make the atmosphere stronger again. Like that. And let's see, what could we change here? So we had the tundra. Let's reduce the water slightly again. Liquid. And let's try, I'll show this as well. Let's go from tundra to just forest. That would be a different type of a green. You could have ice. And now I should also mention this, which I haven't gone through, and that is, so the planet type is set to terrestrial now. There'll be probably more features here as well. So fused, that's a different composition of how the texture, you'll see now, I'll update in a second. This one requires regeneration. I'll click that one actually. And as you can see, let's change the balance of the biomes. So instead of having a traditional Earth-looking composition of a planet, this just generates a different type of texture. And if we reduce the liquid level here, like that, you'll see that this one doesn't really look the same. And then maybe we could change as well from fused to ice. It doesn't necessarily have to be ice, that's just what I've named the different compositions. This one will have more crack features of the surface. And if we change the balance of the biome again, let's have a look. Where am I? Here. You'll see, and you'd probably want to change this one. Obviously, you wouldn't have an ice planet that is. Oh yeah, I guess you could have green if it's somewhat of an ice planet. But you could also change this one now to from ice to maybe that one would be dust, and maybe you'd lower the on the dust one. Maybe we could lower the brightness a lot. So you'll get, and then maybe liquid you could change to something else as well. Like that. Let's have a look. So now we've got an ice planet. I guess it's still settled by the looks of it. People like the cold, like I do here in Sweden. So they're still living there by the looks of it. Yeah, and I guess you could also change the let's see, color variation or the hue. No, let's just leave that one, I think. Oh, it cracked again. Oh yeah, there was one more thing I wanted to show actually. Then I need to take away this this ice coverage. So the final thing now would be if we swap it back to rainforests. Let's remove crater bumps. Let's switch it back to liquid, which is more like what we've got, some blue liquid. And here's what I wanted to mention as well. I spoke before about alienization, and that's a feature that basically will, as I do this one, it'll regenerate all the colors, so it'll take it from whatever you'd expect on Earth, so rainforest won't really look like rainforest anymore. As you can see, it changed it more to a bluer tint, and the further you go on the alienization scale, the more weird or unexpected the colors would be. So here you're into even the reds, and let's have a look maybe here. Let's swap this one to from dust. That's a grey texture anyway, so let's do desert. So here you're starting to get some. Well, let's do this one. Maybe we do want to reduce this feature. So yeah, as you can see now, you get, so what was a rainforest and desert now is something totally alien, whatever material this could be. So you'll be able to, maybe you want to instantiate planets somewhere that look totally odd or different. If we reduce the cloud coverage as well, I guess you could get. And oh, I even forgot, actually what I forgot to do as well is the polar caps, I should mention. Can't believe I forgot that. So let's reduce the alienization again. I should hopefully get something that looks a little bit more like what you'd expect on Earth. Switch that one back to terrestrial. Oh yeah, we warped some stuff down here, didn't we? To get the colors a bit weird. Never mind, it doesn't matter. Let's leave that. If I rotate this planet now a little bit to expose, can I rotate it? Yes, please. Thank you. So this planet now, I forgot to pull the slider, which is polar caps, and that'll introduce ice from the poles. So you'll see the North Pole here, and also the South Pole will have ice on them instead as well. So that's another feature there. Yeah, I think that hopefully concludes, I think, all the features that this... I've probably missed a few things, but in general, it's gone through pretty much everything. Recap is just... The idea is, compared to the existing version, is that you'll be able to instantiate planets that will look different. It won't take up any size in the distribution. Basically, again, all the textures used for this planet is probably less than 100 kilobytes altogether. I guess it'll be a few hundred K by the time I'm done with adding more biomes and maybe some more cloud variations. So yeah, I'm really excited to keep working on this, and I think yeah, I won't commit again to any any release dates. I've done that in the past, and basically I have a daytime job and I do other assets as well, so I've learned that I just have to spend the time that it takes to make these. So I really appreciate the support and the kind comments that you've been given in the forums and on my videos. I really appreciate it, and I think yeah, I'm hoping to get this in the hands of you sooner rather than later. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next update or a video, or I'll have shoot me an email or something from my website if you have any questions. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.